He has acre.
Let's go.
This is the Just Like You and Me podcast. We have Father Martin Connor, LC. He's the National Vocations Director for Legionaries of Christ, and also has his own little podcast, Wired to Love. Father,
that's correct.
It's great to have you on.
To the podcast.
Thank you. So good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. I know you came in from Atlanta today.
Well, I live in Atlanta. I was actually visiting Canada, Calgary, Canada, on my way to Cleveland for a wedding that I'm here for, and I'm glad to be able to take some time and talk to all of you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we want to jump into kind of your vocation story. So where you came from, where the priesthood calling started.
Yeah.
So where did that start for you?
Yeah. So as a vocation director, you hear all kinds of incredible stories about how God works. Right. One of the things that you often hear, especially in a culture that's lost faith, is you need to be mature to answer the call of Christ. How can you hear the call at such a young age? No, you need to be, et cetera, right? Well, I was 12 years old when I heard the call, and it was not a voice. It was a very intense presence that came to me. Obviously, there's a lot of details to the story. But it basically said, you're not going to do what everybody else does. And it was crystal clear. And I knew it wasn't from me. It wasn't in my little head. It was inside of me, but it was outside of me. It was a very, a very powerful experience at 12, which I ran from because it scared me. But when I would get into high school, right, it's not like it disappeared. When I would have times of prayer where I want to be alone and maybe be in a church, it would communicate the same thing, but it would morph into something like, you're going to be part of a great family that's going to do something great for God. Now, it didn't say you're going to be a priest. It just said I wasn't going to do what everybody else is going to do, right? So the priesthood then became, more, it kind of crystallized later on through college when I met priests like the Legionaries that just rocked me. I wanted to be like them. I was like, I never hung out with guys that I could have a beer with, right? That are actually priests. And that experience, after thinking about other, I was thinking about dioceses, Franciscans, or whatever, right? You kind of go through, could I do that? Could I see myself doing that? All that kind of typical introspection that goes on. When I met the Legion, it was pretty immediate that this was my path. But I was praying for that too. I was looking for a sign, and He gave it to me. God gave it to me. So
It's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
We've often heard a lot of times, well, I guess we can't say oftentimes, but the two seminarians that we have talked about and had on this podcast, it seems to be kind of a running trend, I would say, even with any type of vocation, be it marriage, even single life and priesthood. Everyone always has that initial tug. Sometime kind of like in their adolescence or something like that. They feel something just small, right? Mm-hmm. And then you kind of you forget about it. It kind of fades into your subconscious and stuff like that. And you kind of run away from it a little bit. And then all of a sudden it just hits you like a brick at some point, and you don't know when that will be, right? For many people, it could be in their 30s, 40s, or whenever, right?
Right.
Your vocation can start at any time, right? Your time, it's not your time, it's God's time. But when it does hit you, it does just hit you.
It's funny that you say that because there's a running comment among vocation directors, and the comment is the 11s. 11 years old and 11th grade are generally the consistent times when God awakens in you some restlessness. And I was 11, 12, right? And then junior year in high school, you're trying to figure out college, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go, career, all that. He also, generally, statistically speaking, if you talk to seminarians, it'd be kind of an interesting question to ask these guys. When was it, that first call? And, it ends up being oftentimes, not all the time, in those two areas. Funny, isn't it?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So you mentioned you went to college. What college were you attending?
I went to Boston College.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't our Father
Peter
Kreeft.
Yeah, he had a tremendous impact on me.
Really?
Yeah, I was a Catholic revert. So got to college like most Catholics, looking to party hard and chase girls. And he was my first philosophy class and really was the one who challenged me to think and not be superficial. And then that was a year-long course with him. And then I had 2 other courses with him because I was just I was so impacted by him. I wanted to be, I wanted to follow him kind of thing. He had a little bit of a cult on campus anyway because he was a great teacher, right? Mm-hmm. So that was part of my Catholic awakening. I might have, felt the call when I was 11 or 12, but as you said, you can stray from the call or from that pathway, and I did, right? Like many Catholics do. But by the grace of God, and definitely Peter Kreeft, he helped me.
Yeah, I mean, God works through people. Like, he really, truly does. And that's what I realized, like, when I pray, I don't necessarily hear God, like, saying something. But one of my buddies talked about how he hears God through people. And then that kind of, like, clicked, and I just kind of reflected on that. I'm like, wait a minute. That's how God's speaking to me. Like, I meet people at a certain time, or I have certain conversation, and it's just super impactful in that way. Peter Kreeft he's fantastic. He was actually at St. Sebastian's doing a talk, and I had the privilege to listen to one of them, and he is absolutely hilarious.
Great.
Yeah, I think he's in his like mid-80s.
Yeah, I was going to say he's got to be up there.
Still teaching.
Yeah. Still teaching and traveling, obviously coming down here. But you mentioned your reversion to the faith.
Yeah.
We love talking about those stories because it gives people hope.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean like you're Catholic or you're following Christ, like you're always going to be perfect. There's going to be ups and downs. So do you mind talking about a little bit what might have caused the kind of drifting away from the faith, and then really, I know you mentioned Peter Kreeft got you back, but what else might have helped with that?
Yeah, well, so I already mentioned I went to Boston College. Well, I had a sister who went previous. So I'm one of 8. I have 5 older sisters. Beautiful. And one of my sisters went and left the church. Mm-hmm. So that really kind of rattled my parents, and they really didn't want me to go because they were nervous, like, the typical thing, worried about me. And so I don't know all the circumstances, but I found myself in a philosophy of Buddhism course. I was still trying to find my soul, right? That first year of college, I think it was first year of college. And I became super enthralled by this teacher who was very passionate about Buddhism. But I remember my mom's voice, in the back of my mind saying, before you jump ship like your sister, right? You got to make sure you're Catholic or something like that, right? I don't remember exactly what she said. So I remember saying to myself, okay, I can't pursue this interest in Buddhism unless I check out seriously my Catholic faith. Now, granted, Peter Kreeft was helping with that, right? So I began to read C.S. Lewis, and I began to read G.K. Chesterton. And I'm telling you, I became on fire. I became this teacher's worst nightmare because she would talk about nirvana, and I'd be like, what? What's that? And what is that related to? So because I had all this knowledge that I was learning by my readings, and she, by the end of the semester, couldn't show me the door fast enough, right? Thanks, but no thanks. So that was really the turning point. Probably, I don't know if it would have been my first semester or second semester, or probably my first year, when I had become a revert officially.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that because, like I said, that's such an amazing aspect of our faith. Like, our God is such a merciful God that we can kind of fall away and come back, but also makes your faith stronger. Like, too, I love that you had to go look. Your mom wanted you to make sure you checked everything out.
Yeah.
Before you kind of go anywhere.
Let me just say something to your readers or to your listeners here. The Catholic faith is reasonable. So if you're saying to yourself, "Oh, the Catholic's this or the Catholic's that," or I don't know an answer to that question, let me just tell you, there is a question, and a very reasonable question. Our faith is not contrary to logic. Yes, it has a mystery, like the Trinity. It's a mystery. We don't know the full understanding. But our Catholic faith is super reasonable, and that's why it's so convincing once you go on the journey.
I love that. I love that because I love human imagination, and human imagination is always sparked by the one question that kind of starts every conversation: why? Right?
Bingo.
There's why, and then there's a how. Right? Mm-hmm. There's an answer to that question, and it all stipulates, it all originates from the imagination. There was trying to think of the book, or no, it wasn't a book, it was an essay, that was written by a Trappist monk whose name is Erasmus Leva Merikakis.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Oh, you know him? Do you know him personally or just
No,
know of him?
I've read some of his stuff. Really
Okay.
solid
Yeah, he's
stuff.
excellent. Have you ever read his essay, The Anointed Imagination?
No,
Okay, it's a fantastic
I'll have to write
essay.
that one down.
Yes, it's fantastic. But in it, he writes this one beautiful point about how our imagination is anointed, right? We're always constantly thinking of stuff to create stuff. And that's part of the things that really brings us back to God, because it's an image, it's an imitation of God,
Makes
right?
sense, yeah.
We create different images of different things, but it's also what allows us to connect to other things, right? Such as people like G.K. Chesterton or C.S. Lewis, because you can kind of create almost like an image of them inside your mind when you start reading their works.
Yeah.
This podcast, one of the beautiful things that I think that we have with it is that we get to interview so many beautiful guests that basically talk about their Catholic story, why they're Catholic, why they became Catholic, why they recame back to, that's not a term, but you get the idea, why they came back, why they reverted to Catholicism, right? These are all witnesses to the beautiful faith that we have. And sometimes people just need that reminder. I think it's a line inside the Catholic Catechism, one of the first parts of it, it's talking about Scripture. And one of the lines is, I'm gonna misquote it, but it basically says that it talks about the Bible as being a physical revelation of God, right? In some sense, because it's written by humans, right? It's a physical revelation. It's a physical book. It's the same thing with human beings. Human beings are physical revelations of God's love for us, right? And that's how you act as a person with your story, your testimony, your reversion back to God. It's the same thing with us in this podcast. They're all physical revelations of what God is able to do for us.
Sounds like John Paul II's theology of the body, where he says the human persona is a sign to the world of a mystery. Same thing you're saying, basically.
Yeah. I love it.
Powerful.
It's a very modern thought too. I think the idea of kind of bringing everything back. You know, every time in the church has its own, not wholly different from any other part of the church or any time of the church, but just a different. I would almost say like strategy, I guess, or for lack of a better term. It really does seem with nowadays with the internet, there are so many ways to connect. There are so many. It also can lead to a lot of bad things, obviously, but. Just the importance of having stuff like this. And I know one of the things that you wanted to talk about was your podcast. Your podcast is obviously doing the same thing as us, maybe a little bit better.
I wouldn't say that.
Oh, you never know. But I mean, we'd love to talk to you about your podcast. Like, why did you start it?
Yeah, so I went on a journey as a priest when I was in Rome studying. I began studying the theology of the body in the late 90s, so probably a good 10 years after they actually were published, the audiences of John Paul II. And it had a kind of a transformative effect on me and my celibacy, the living of my celibacy, the living of an appreciation of marital love as well. You know, that's what his teaching really touches on, all facets of kind of human love, right? So I ended up coming back to the States and doing a degree, kind of a post-grad certification in theology of the body. And I had to write a thesis and I wrote it on emotional chastity. And I interviewed probably about 100 young people, single, dating, married, all kinds of people on, the healthiness or unhealthiness of your emotions, bad choices, all that kind of stuff that we can fall into nowadays. And I had all this incredible material. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book. I did it for my course. So I put a small group resource together called Reclaiming Love, Connecting the Head and the Heart. That's kind of the emotional chastity book. That was my thesis. And then from there came out Wired to Love is the podcast, because what you see in the teachings of John Paul II is that, Genesis 1:26, made in the image and likeness of God, he made them male and female, right? That we are wired to give ourselves in that totality of gift of self, one to the other, right? And if we don't figure out how to do that and do that well, we really are destined for unhappiness. And this is the symptom of a culture that we're living in. We don't know how to love. We know how to self-love. We're really good at that. And that's because we're fallen creatures, right? But the real gift of self and finding, what is it? John Paul II says, you find yourself in giving yourself, right? You possess yourself as you give yourself. There's all these amazing lines he has in his writings about that. When you learn to love and love in a healthy way, you become awakened to who you really are. And so that fascinated me. And then I wrote a dating book, which was kind of the aftermath of all this material that I had. And I wrote it with 10 other young adults. It was kind of my COVID project. And then had a whole series of kind of podcast interviews on that. And now this coming year is kind of different themes. So that's kind of how The Wired to Love was born.
That's awesome. So you said you were like breaking down your book in like the beginning of the podcast. And so are you still doing that with other books? Are you just talking to other guests about different types of love?
Yeah, so what I will do now, I mean, so I have 2 seasons. One season totally on emotional chastity, the emotional chastity book. I mean, there's so much you could talk about there. And then I have one on the dating book. This season is really kind of a mishmash on themes that I'm interested in from those 2 books. Like with your comrade Justin, we talked about fraternal friendships. Friendship is big, like healthy friendship, because that's healthy love. Right? You're not using another. You're trying to understand the other. You're trying to grow in appreciation of the other, be it an opposite sex or same sex. It doesn't matter. So those themes fascinate me because they're part of the solution. If we can learn to love one another in a healthy way, we're gonna change the culture. We're gonna transform the culture because the gospel is based in all that healthy love. Right?
100%. And we talk about all the time on our podcast how like social media has just breaks that apart. It makes everyone themselves. You made an awesome point. Like you have your For You page that is for you, and it makes you just yourself. You don't care or worry about anybody else. So that's awesome that you guys are talking about that because it's super, super important.
I just quote, just when you were just talking there, Pope Benedict says the globalization of the world has made us neighbors, but not brothers.
Wow.
So we're connected to so many people. We become our neighbor, but we don't know them in relationship as a brother or a sister in Christ.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's so
You said
painfully
something really cool too. I heard you mention self-love. And to obviously, always to a certain extent, everything in most cases, in a lot of cases, moderation is kind of like the key thing, right? And one of the things that we've really noticed, especially in kind of the lens of social media, and I would say just the younger generation in general, there's this new growing trend of something called self-care.
Oh, yeah.
And I like to call it's really
it.
Actually just selfishness and self-isolation in many cases. And that's really what you see. It kind of goes along with that quote that you just spoke about with Pope Benedict, where he's talking about, we're so connected, but we're not brothers, right? We're neighbors. We're next to each other. Because that's exactly how social media is. Everyone is on social media. Everyone's in the town forum, right? But no one is interacting with one another, right?
Yep.
And there's like comments and stuff like that on posts, but you're not actually, communicating with anyone. And many times, in many cases, it's really just, arguments and stuff like that. That's what the point that Mike was mentioning with like how your social media is tailored to you, right? And to you only. It's not tailored to you to make you connect with other people. It's tailored to keep you looking at your phone, keeping you isolated from everyone around you.
Totally. You should check out when you get a chance. There's a YouTube video called "The Innovation of Loneliness."
Write that one down, Brian.
It's super good. That alone would be a subject for your podcast because it's all about what you're saying. How social media doesn't bring us together; it isolates us in a form of selfishness, essentially, right? So it's what you're doing here is you're trying to use it for a good, right? You're trying to bring people together. You're trying to draw up good conversations amongst them and get them to think and reflect. It's powerful. That's what we need to be using it for. These types of forums, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a big reason why we started this because we realized there's so much garbage on the internet, and like we like podcasts, but you listen to any like secular podcast, there's always going to be like an ounce of just bad. They didn't talk about something bad, or a lot of podcasts are having like adult models on there that it's slowly poisoning our brain. So we're like, let's just have good conversations where we talk all the time. And then we have these awesome conversations. I want to kind of bring it back a little bit to you talk about in college and finding your vocation. And you mentioned kind of looking at the diocesan priesthood versus like Franciscans or Legionaries of Christ. Yeah. Can you talk about a little bit why you chose the Legionaries of Christ and kind of?
Yeah, I mean, and this is not, I say this in all my support of young men who are in discernment. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you're attracted to. You gotta know what you need. So I couldn't live on my own. Like, I can't be a diocesan priest. I need my brothers. I need my bros. I need guys locked in my arms who are going to challenge me and give me accountability. That's religious life. Mm-hmm. The Legionaries of Christ are a religious order, right? And I needed that. But I also needed a challenge to do something great. The Legionaries have an awesome mission to form apostles, Christian leaders, and send them out to impact and change culture through the power of the gospel. So you're working with experiences that are transformative. And you get to see people talk about this podcast. I mean, all of what we do could be on this podcast because we're meeting and challenging people to come out of their comfort zones, to think big, to dream, to do something great for Christ and the gospel. And you run into people who want that message. They resonate with that message. They want to do great things in their life, but they're not challenged to do it, right? So when I met that charism of the Legionaries, I was like, sign me up, right? Because I did want to be in a community, and again, you got to know what you need and what you want, and it will mesh with what God calls you to. He's not going to call you to something that's not going to click. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So.
Or like God knows all, and a lot of people are, especially when they get older and they think they want to be in a marriage, or they might have that call into religious life, and they're scared to take that. God will never put you in a situation that isn't going to help you or be beneficial for you or what you need. You may have your own, like, oh, I need to do this, I want to do this, but that's not, and you're your own God at that point. So that's awesome that you mentioned that. So where are the Legionaries based out of? So
I live at the national headquarters. That's in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
I'm in that community. We have in the North American territory, which takes in the United States, Canada, the Philippines, and Korea. I know.
Makes sense.
Why, I don't know, but that's just how they divided it all up, right? We're in Europe, we're in Latin America, we're in Asia. So we have about 23 communities in our territory. And Georgia, we have 3 communities. I'm in one of them.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, so you're traveling as a national vocation director.
Yeah, so I go around to the communities to support their local vocation and youth work, to empower them, equip them with what they will help them do their work better, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I generally get involved when somebody wants to take a serious step towards a seminary and really formally discern. That's when I get involved with the discernment process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, the vocations directors are always some of my favorite priests I've ever met because they're like constantly like trying not recruiting in like a bad way, but they're always constantly just talking to people, building friendships, building relationships, and it's real. That's why I also like talking to priests in a different way. But so you mentioned Philippines, traveling over there. Do you have any? Doesn't have to be isolated to the Philippines. Any like travel stories that will be just a little more interesting, different?
Yeah, priests always do. Well, I can tell you this story. So I was flying, actually, this is a couple of years ago, from Cleveland to Detroit. In one of these puddle, you go up and you land like it's a 20-minute flight or less. I don't know I can't remember what it was. So I'm getting on this plane, and honestly, I was saying to myself, God, listen, I want to just pray. Can you not get me in any situations? People leave me? Because you're walking around the college, some people like to engage with the priests, So I was really just needed to pray and get ready for my next gig, right, in Detroit. And so I'm saying this to myself as I get onto the plane, sit down in the back of the plane, and this 27-year-old girl sits down next to me. I'm minding my own business, standing in my lane, reading my breviary, minding my own business, and God is just saying, say hello, say hello, say hello to her. So, we're going up in the air, and then, we're getting ready to land. Like, it really was up and down. So I'm like, I turned to her, maybe the last 5 minutes of the flight. I'm going to say hello. My name is Father Martin Connor. What's your name? She ended up being this young Jewish girl who's going to see her Catholic boyfriend in Detroit. And we were just talking back and forth, and I said, listen, the chances of you and I ever meeting again is like 0. I'm a Catholic priest. Is there anything you want to ask me? And she's quiet and then said, what is Catholicism? And I said, second question? So in that moment, because this is what happens to a priest, in that moment, I was like, holy cow, how am I going to answer that, right? Like we all reacted.
Yeah.
Boom. God said to me, inspired me to say, describe to her sin without using the word. So I started talking to her about the muckiness and the yuckiness of being, all of that guilt and shame and regret that we have when we do stuff that's stupid, right? And her eyes just opened up bigger and bigger. And then I said, what about, I said, you ever had that feeling? She's like, yeah, I've had it. And I'm like, God never wanted you to have that feeling. In fact, he was so committed to it that he came among us as a man. And he took all of that nonsense and craziness that you feel, which we call sin, and he took upon it himself to take it away forever. And she's like, wow. I'm like, that's Jesus Christ. And that's Catholicism. And she's like, well, why didn't my boyfriend ever tell me anything? I'm like, you got to work on that boy.
Yeah.
And we landed, and that was the end of the story.
That's
Beautiful.
absolutely beautiful. Like I said, God puts you in the perfect spot and for the perfect thing.
The priests are like that. They get in all kinds of situations.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. Yeah. The white collar just leads to so many different conversations.
It does.
But this has been absolutely fantastic, Father. We really appreciate you taking the time for it. But so we like our guests to have like a final thought, call to action type thing. So this is your moment for that.
Okay. So what I would say to all of you and the listeners here would be the following. If you're not in a good place, examine how you love. And most likely, you're probably loving yourself super well, but not loving others very well. And if you really want to change that, you got to serve somebody other than yourself. And you will find how transformative that is. I can tell you stories about it. So that's it. That we all battle with that. It's not just you out there. It's me too. But when you give yourself to others in service, family, friends, girlfriend, whatever it is, and really love them for who they are and not what they can give you, then that's where the transforming power of charity, Christ's charity, comes alive.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Father. That was absolutely beautiful. And this has been the Just Like You and Me podcast. See you next time.
We're out.
Thank you.
God bless. Take care now.
Father, it was great to have you on.